It's Wednesday, November 1st, 2017, and this is Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur, where I preview the Seattle Seahawks and their upcoming game every week with a guest. This week's guest is a perfect guest to have. He not only writes and does videos for Field Gulls on the Seattle Seahawks side, but, organically, originally, he is a fan of the Washington Redskins. Those two teams meet this Sunday in Seattle. A big game for Washington, and that they needed to sort of, keep their hopes alive for the upcoming season, for Seattle to stay in the race atop the NFC, especially coming off of a big win. So Sam does a great job of breaking down the schemes for the Seahawks, but is also quite familiar with it for Washington. And you can check out his videos, every week on Field Gulls as well as SB Nation. You can find him on Twitter at Samuel R. Gold. Sam, thanks so much for joining the show. Can you sort of quickly go over what year you started watching the Washington team? Clearly now, like, a lot of people cover teams that they weren't originally fans of. So how does it feel to be covering the Seahawks now?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. I guess I became a fan of the team back in high school, or back around 2007-ish, 2006-ish, right around the time that Sean Taylor was playing. And pretty much going to a game, seeing him live, and seeing his passion for the game made me a fan of the Washington Redskins. And I guess I started covering the Seattle Seahawks about a year ago on Field Gulls. And a lot of the reason was mainly due to the fact that the Seahawks and the Redskins have a very similar offensive scheme, and that definitely helped at the time to understand the difference. And I enjoyed breaking down the team. I enjoyed seeing how a good defense was supposed to be run, and essentially it helped me make that decision and basically want to do more analysis overall.
And with those schemes and everything, Jay Gruden is the head coach in Washington. His defensive coordinator last year was Joe Barry. His offensive coordinator was Sean McVay. McVay, of course, now head coach at the Rams. Barry works under McVay now with the Rams. And so they have changed to defensive coordinator Greg Minuski and offensive coordinator Matt Cavanaugh. How much have they changed their offensive and defensive outlooks and schemes based on those changes?
Well, a lot of the schemes are going to be very similar than they were last year. For example, Joe Barry mainly ran a 3-4 under defense as his base. And that scheme is actually what Greg Minuski runs also with the Redskins. And the key difference is it's mainly communication. For example, Will Compton, who's one of the inside linebackers for the Redskins, basically said that communication was the issue. They'd get late play calls, and generally they didn't have time to make their adjustments, which caused a lot of their issues. Greg Minuski comes back with a much stricter demeanor. He's more demanding, more controlling. And that, in my opinion, is a very good step for the team, as long as them obviously signing a few free agent acquisitions like DJ Swearinger. In terms of offense, Sean McVay did have influences of, for example, the Mike Shanahan scheme, which is a lot of zone-based stuff. It's actually Darrell Bevell uses a lot of similar concepts. So when Sean McVay left, a lot of those concepts actually, because they came from Sean McVay and his idea of what he wanted to call. The main difference is that Jay Gruden calls actually more of a power running scheme, for example, now. So there are some slight differences, but generally from a scheme standpoint, they're actually both largely the same as they were last year. Except for this year, obviously, Jay Gruden is now calling the offensive plays.
And a lot of the changes, too, this goes for both teams having long injury reports this week, and things seem especially dire for Washington, don't they?
Yeah, they definitely aren't pretty right now. In terms of injuries, for example, the Redskins are missing their entire offensive line. Are on the injury report, and as of right now, it's maybe one or maybe two of those guys will actually play on Sunday. Because Trent Williams is probably the best player on the offense and maybe the best player on the entire team, and he needs surgery, and he's debating postponing it just so he can play in a couple more games. But I don't know if that's going to be smart in the long term. So I'm really hoping that they make a wise decision in that regard, especially after the whole RG3 incident a few years ago.
And then also they're missing Jordan Reed. Is that right?
Yep. They're missing Jordan Reed. They just lost Matt Ioannidis. who is one of their best defensive linemen. Chris Thompson should still play. I know he's been dealing with some other issues. And Rob Kelly and Samajay P. Ryan both will get the ball occasionally, but not nearly as much as Chris Thompson, especially out of the backfield.
So with some of the other changes they made on offense, they lose Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon. Their new top receivers are signing Terrell Pryor to a 1-year deal, former Seahawk, though he wouldn't play receiver for the Seahawks. And then you would see like maybe upgrades or at least upgraded opportunities for Josh Doxson and Jamison Crowder. How have those three receivers performed this year?
Honestly, pretty terribly. Terrell Pryor, for some reason, has the case of the drops, and he can't separate and he can't finish plays. He's actually been relegated down to fourth-string duties. He's barely getting any playing time. He's getting maybe 3 targets a game, 4 targets a game at this point. And then Josh Doxson, who is the Redskins' first-round pick back in 2016, he's essentially he can't create separation. He can't make the most of his opportunities, and they have a serious wide receiver problem, which is why I think this week especially Vernon Davis will be the key target.
So it seems like offensively, when you look at the Redskins this year, they're 12th in scoring, but I really feel like that's almost misleading when I look at their schedule, and maybe it seems difficult to judge a team based on this because it's like, well, it's the thing is, it seems like they avoid games where they do nothing. So like their lowest output is 17 points, but their highest output is 27 points. So they also don't seem to have these explosive games. And especially when you have like a pretty good quarterback with Kirk Cousins, it does seem like, that they're not reaching their full potential, especially with the way that they were doing under maybe Sean McVay the previous 2 years. And when you go down with the receivers and them not performing well, Jordan Reed is injured. Their top leading receiver is Vernon Davis, who is 33 and was not expected to be in this position. And actually, their true leading receiver is Chris Thompson. And neither of the running backs, seem to be all of that dominant. So offensively, and when we look at the Seahawks matching up with the Washington Redskins, who do you expect to score for Washington, and what would be their best opportunity to do that? And do you expect them to struggle offensively?
I do expect them to struggle offensively, especially in the red zone. They've had a really hard time with that, especially this season. Even having taller receivers for some reason hasn't turned into tangible points. Chris Thompson is the number one player I would say that could score. Vernon Davis, maybe you'll get a lucky Ryan Grant touchdown, or Josh Doxson is semi-reliable in the red zone when he's not trying to catch a fade route. But basically, the team as a whole is struggling, as I said, in the red zone, but it's struggling to move the chains unless it's passing. Kirk Cousins, as he said, he's having an above average year. He isn't killing it like he did in the last couple of years, but he's playing well enough that he needs other players around him to step up. And that was definitely his biggest issue for the past couple of weeks. None of the wide receivers are stepping up. The run game is in shambles outside of Chris Thompson. And since Chris Thompson dealt with so many injuries, especially back at Florida State in his first year or two in the NFL, they're limiting his carries because they don't want him getting injured. He's way too valuable in pass protection, and he's way too valuable as mismatch. So he gets maybe 10 to 15 touches per game, and that's it. They don't want to use him as much as they could.
Kirk Cousins has 4 interceptions, which is a good total for a quarterback, but the Washington is dead last in fumbles lost. They fumbled the ball 18 times, 7 by Cousins, 5 by Jamison Crowder, 3 by Chris Thompson, and 28th overall in turnovers because of those fumbles. Is that an issue that can be fixed? Is it just bad luck, or is that something that you are concerned about pretty much every week when you're following Washington, the turnovers and the fumbles?
I mean, truthfully, besides the Jamison Crowder fumbles, which are mainly on punt returns, I didn't honestly think it was that bad, but hearing the numbers, man, that's awful. I guess the Kirk Cousins stuff, it's if you have a pass rusher that gets in the backfield, it's, in my opinion, that's probably the hardest Hardest thing to stop is a fumble in the pocket. Jamison Crowder just needs to be more careful on punt returns. And I don't know, with one, at least a couple of those fumbles were definitely the result of that last minute lateral fumble situation back against the Chiefs in the end of that game.
Mm-hmm. And just as well with Jamison Crowder's fumbling on special teams, might as well keep it there for a minute and just talk about, a lot of teams this year, or at least a lot. I mean, relatively, it feels like a lot with Oakland, Kansas City, Philadelphia had kicker injuries, had to sign someone else late, either in the preseason or at the beginning of the year, and gotten very fortunate. The kicker in Kansas City just won Special Teams Player of the Week with 5 for 5. Obviously, the kicker over there, Jake whatever for Philadelphia, kicked a game-winning 62-yarder, whatever it was. And Washington also placed a kicker on IR with Dustin Hopkins. But it seems like Nick Rose has not, set the world on fire. 3 for 4 on the field goals, 4 for 5 on extra points. So he's missed one of each of those. How do you feel about the kicking situation for Washington as well as the punting situation? What kind of a punter's quality is Tress Way?
Tress Way is a very solid punter, and I'm a huge fan of him. We also have a good long snapper, Nick Sundberg. I do agree though. The issue is kicking. It was an issue with Dustin Hopkins. Even though 3 and 4, then 4 and 5 isn't terrible. It's not like he's looked fantastic on those kicks. I'm not even sure what those distances were. I don't think there were anything of significance. I don't know. I worry mainly because the offensive line is so injured that it's also affecting the kicking game, and that happened against the Cowboys. They were able to block that kick mainly because the offensive line couldn't stop the defensive line in that. And that's something that's going to carry over in all fields of this game.
And what would you be looking for? So that the Seahawks run a similar offense to Washington in the past, and what have you noticed in terms of, before we get into Washington's defense, what have you noticed with Russell Wilson this year in respect to how his game has changed? Because he's throwing the ball a lot more. There's clearly no running game to rely on. In watching the Seahawks week to week and doing videos from time to time in that sort of watching the passing game, what have you noticed from Russell Wilson thus far this year in terms of his changes?
I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed overall with his abilities. Last season, I was definitely concerned, especially after he was dealing with those injuries, and even when he seemed healthy, he didn't look as accurate, especially on the short and medium throws, and he definitely wasn't accurate on the long throws, where he consistently either underthrew or overthrew the ball. This season, he's done such a better job. I mean, the Tanner McAvoy throw was pure money last week. He had a bunch of throws that hit the receiver's hands this week, and then fell to the ground. I think in general, throwing the ball more and more for him, I don't think it's a negative. And I think that's something that this offense needs to start to realize, is that if they're going to get 3 yards in a game, and that's what happened versus the Texans, they need to design the scheme so that Russell Wilson can be in charge of the ball. If that means little tunnel screens or slip screens or anything that they're doing over there, if that's an easy way for him to get rid of the ball, I think they need to keep doing that. He's really good in the quick game, and if he can continue on his path of last week with the Paul Richardson throws and that Tanner McAvoy throw of being able to connect deep, I mean, he's going to carry this entire team on his back.
And, a big part of that everybody talks about, obviously, with respect to the Seahawks week to week, day to day, hour to hour, every day, you just keep hearing about the offensive line. They trade for Dwayne Brown. What did you see in terms of Reese Adiyambo this season? And knowing what even if it's a small amount about Dwayne Brown, how big of a change do you expect that to be in terms of the play-to-play, presence of a left tackle who could potentially, keep a clean pocket open for an extra second?
I think from my limited information on Dwayne Brown, and I haven't done really any film analysis on him, but something, as I was talking to another Field Gulls writer, Coleman Crawford, he basically told me that Dwayne Brown, he's a good pass protector, but he's not going to offer that much in the run game. And while that's fine, especially with how I think this team needs the pass protection more than a run blocking left tackle. Anyways, I think he's a significant upgrade over Reese Odiombo. I mean, Reese consistently gets beaten. I mean, watch the Texans game where Clowney just abused him. I would love to upgrade Ifedi also, especially after JPP and all the other guys, or I guess not JPP, but was it Olivier Vernon or was it JPP? One of the two. Completely wrecked him. He completely wrecked him in the Giants game. But Dwayne Brown is a good start. He's definitely a good start for this team, and I definitely do think that's an improvement.
Did you get to notice much at all this week with regards to Ethan Posick at guard? Because I know that he's been named the starter there.
His ability to pass protect is definitely better, and he's definitely better at sustaining his blocks and putting in the extra effort. And that's something that he was definitely noticeable in college. Was that even if he gets bullied into the backfield, he always fought back and always sustained his block regardless. And that was something that really impressed me in college, and it's something he does with the Seahawks, and it's something that he'll continue to do. Just keep an eye on him during the game, and you'll see him push guys after plays. You'll see him be chippy also, and in my opinion, it's fantastic.
So if you've got Dwayne Brown, and let's say Ethan Posick really settles in nicely to the left guard spot, and you've got Justin Britt at center, then your next two areas of potentially making changes would be that right tackle spot, like you said, with Ifedi, or the right guard spot with Ode Ibushi, and then you've got Ethan Posick if he's playing well when Luke Jokel comes back. With regards to Jokel, Posick, Ibushi, and Ifedi, what would your gut tell you in terms of a hunch on what sort of how they would make the form of that offensive line when Jokel comes back?
It's a great question, and it all depends on if they want to play Posick at the right guard position. In my opinion, I mean, I'm sure he can play it. So the way I would run the line would be, assuming that he can do it comfortably, would be Dwayne Brown at left tackle, Jokel at left guard, Britt at center, right guard being Posick, and then right tackle, I guess you have to do Ifedi. Not happily, but you have to do them. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully next season you can sign somebody or do something, get rid of him, because oh my God, he's awful.
And have you seen, I know you also like to sometimes watch, do you see hope for these running backs to have an impact? Because you've talked about how there won't be really an upgrade maybe in the run blocking so much with Dwayne Brown potentially, and then maybe that's not going to be a part of it. So with regards to Eddie Lacy and Thomas Rawls and maybe one day CJ Prosise and JD McKissick, with regards to any of these guys, do you see there a chance of that improving as the year goes on?
It's tough to say. I'm honestly on the no side. And it's the issue isn't that it's only the running backs. It's the running backs aren't making plays. Lacy, I was kind of concerned going in that he wouldn't have the lateral quickness to break a quick play in the backfield, kind of like how Thomas Rawls actually does this very well. The issue with Rawls, though, is that, I mean, at least in the Texans game, he, like, on a draw play, he missed a wide open hole, and he would at least gotten 5 or 6, but he went -1. And it was extremely painful to see. That's something that'll be in one of my videos this week, actually, on the Seahawks. And it's beyond that. It's fullbacks aren't blocking correctly, tight ends aren't blocking correctly. It's a hodgepodge of everybody screwing up the play one way or the other. And it's just something that I don't know how they're going to fix it unless they fire everyone or get rid of Cable. I have no hope. I've lost all hope for this run game.
How are because it does sound like maybe Eddie Lacy will get the start and then potentially be treated like a number one back, and that they're going to try and give him just all the carries as long, for them, with some regards to maybe Thomas Rawls, but it sounds like they're just going to pretend like Lacy is the number one back for the first quarter and so on. With regards to Washington's run defense and the injuries that they may have there with Ioannidis, how have they done, and how do you expect them to do?
It's a very good question. And it's kind of hard to say directly because they were able to shut down, say, like the Raiders when they had a full strength front seven. They shut down Marshawn Lynch and that entire line, which was something that at the time was very unheard of. But then you go fast forward to Dallas Cowboys, and Ezekiel Elliott ran train all over the entire Redskins line, and that's kind of like okay, he's a top 5 or top 3 running back, and then you have a top 5 line, a top 5 run blocking line. So it's kind of interesting because I don't know where the middle ground is, that in the sense of, I know the Seahawks offensive line blocking isn't good in terms of run, but I also know that the Redskins defensive line definitely isn't good enough to stop the Dallas Cowboys. But will it be good enough to stop the Seahawks? I don't know. And that's part of the thing, is that I don't see the instant penetration problem that the Seahawks had against the Texans being as big of an issue against the Redskins. I see this being as more of a, I think Lacey will get like 3 yards per carry, 2.5 to 3 yards per carry. And for this season, that's actually not bad. And he'll just be hammering it between the guards, between the tackles. And that's honestly where I see this game going, is that I think they'll get movement just because they'll be going against backups, but I don't know if I'll see him breaking a 20-yard gain.
I don't know if people outside of Washington, if they're not paying attention, would recognize the young potential building blocks on the Washington defense for maybe guys that are 25 and under. Preston Smith obviously comes to mind, 4.5 sacks this season, a 25-year-old linebacker. Is there anyone else in that 25 and under or 26 and under range? DJ Swearinger perhaps also, but guys that you see playing with Washington for the next 5 years on their defense that they'll really help them continue to get better?
It's a really good question. Jonathan Allen was easily the number one guy I would answer that question. He was the 17th pick this year by the Redskins in the draft, and he looked amazing. In his first season, he looked really good. And then I believe it was a knee injury is the reason why he was put on IR. But he was definitely that player that I would say he's the guy to watch for years to come. Their second round guy, Ryan Anderson, it was hard to tell. He hasn't really done anything yet, limited snaps. In terms of guys that I think could stand out, Mason Foster. I'm not sure how old he is, but he's definitely one of the better defensive players. And I would add in Kendall Fuller. Kendall Fuller, who was a second-year cornerback, has definitely stepped up. There's definitely a few guys, but we definitely need to see more consistency. And it's besides Jonathan Allen, there hasn't really been a clear double check. We got this one right feeling yet for any of these players.
And Mason Foster is out for the year now. Is that correct?
He was put on injured reserve, but I think it's one of those cases where he could come back. But he's a 100% out for the Seahawks game, without a doubt.
And I believe Zach Brown was on the injury report this week as well, correctly? How has he played with his, this is his third team in 3 years. It always seems like he puts up numbers, but he was a Pro Bowler last year, but didn't get a lot of attention. How has Zach Brown done this season?
He's a really good run defender, but he's struggling in pass coverage. And that's something that I see Jimmy Graham taking advantage of, is that if the Redskins play zone coverage at all, which I put at about 25% of the time, I see Graham being that first option over the middle of the field. I think that's a mismatch, and I think they'll take advantage of it. Brown has the speed, but for some reason, the speed and the instincts aren't fully matching yet.
And I mentioned Preston Smith. How is Preston Smith and Ryan Kerrigan? Because Ryan Kerrigan's obviously a name a lot of people know. How are they looking as far as the pass rush?
Ryan Kerrigan's definitely the best pass rusher on the team, and he actually looks stronger and better this year than he did in the past couple of years, which is very interesting. Preston Smith, I mean, you mentioned this earlier, but as someone that's been following this team for a while, his last season, just last year, he looked awful. He looked like a bust, and he looked like a guy that many actually gave up on him because Trent Murphy kind of took over the spot. He got busted for PEDs, and I don't know if he's still out. I don't know why he's still out. Maybe it's injury. I have no idea why he's still out. Or no, actually, sorry, he tore his ACL or something. But Trent Murphy kind of took his role last season, and for some reason, Preston Smith is stepping up this year. So he went from like a promising rookie season, absolute trash his second year, to a solid B player this year. So it's kind of interesting, and it's hard to give an honest answer because it's when you see that variability, it's kind of we don't know what to expect.
So, and finally, like, just, I mean, also, like, in terms of Washington's results throughout the year, you know, they lose the first week to Philadelphia. They beat the Rams in LA week 2, which is looking pretty good. Then they beat the Raiders, who at the time, you know, people thought were pretty good. I think, you know, obviously they haven't done so well. Then you lose to the Chiefs, which, you know, maybe the best team in the NFL, certainly, you know, up there. But then, like, you know, a 2-point win over 49ers, something also that the Seahawks can relate to. So there's similarities there. Another loss to the Eagles, and then a loss to the Cowboys. How down are you perhaps right now on the 3-4 season? Are you hopeful that it's just the, you know, the schedule didn't quite break their way, or, you know, are these injuries mounting up and going to prevent them from making the actual playoffs and having, you know, feeling good about this season?
Unfortunately, it's the latter. And that's, as a consistently pessimistic Washington Redskins fan, that's honestly where it's taken me right now. Is we did not look good against the Eagles. We did not look good against the Cowboys. And honestly, by the way the Cowboys controlled the ball, controlled the clock, that score should have been a lot worse. Really, yeah, I mean, the 49ers was the exact example. You go up 17, I think it was 17-0, and then they just chipped away at it. And that was something that's we'll start out the first drive is almost always a scoring drive. We'll get 3 points or 7 points, like pretty much 95% of the time on that first drive. The problem though is that we can't consistently maintain that ability. And I don't know if that's because they're scripting plays in the beginning or just another reason for it, but we just can't find a rhythm on the second and third drives. And so that usually allows teams back in the game. And when you can't start that strongly against stronger teams like the Eagles or the Cowboys, you just end up getting spanked. So what I think my key for this game, especially with this offense, and it's something I'm probably going to talk about in that article I mentioned for tomorrow, is that if the Seahawks can stop the Redskins' opening drive, I think that will go wonders with the Seahawks in terms of their ability to win this game.
All right. Well, Sam, you can follow him on Twitter at Samuel R. Gold. You can obviously check out his articles and videos on Field Gulls and through SB Nation. Sam, is there anything else you'd like to promote?
No, at this time, yeah, if you just follow me on Field Gulls and then my YouTube channel as well. And you can find that all again on fieldgulls.com. Thanks again for having me.
Of course. It's been great to have you and get this information. I want to say good luck, but I'm going to say good luck to your Seahawks side, the coverage side, not to your home personal fandom. Sorry about that.
No, and for my video next week on the Redskins and the Seahawks, it'll be, I promise, a very unbiased, very factual, and realistically too objective video with no emotion. Yeah. And you guys will love it, so don't worry.
I don't think anyone who's been following your work is too concerned about it. I'm sure you get a little bit of crap from people one way or another, but in terms of why are you writing for a Seahawks website? Well, you know, we got to cover sports of all kinds, I think, different teams. So this has been this episode of Seahawks Chats, previewing the Redskins and Seahawks coming up this Sunday in Seattle. Come back next week for a new episode of something.